Welcome to my channel. My name is Nita Brown. I am a woman with an exceptional body in that it is an exception to almost everything a woman's body is supposed to be. I am on a journey from the male persona that I've hidden behind for my entire life to becoming the woman I should have been. And, well, actually am. And I wanted to make this video to document that journey, in part for myself, my friends, and my family, so that they can see the changes, see the things I'm dealing with, my emotions, my thoughts, the experiences that I'm having. I also wanted to do it for other people who are coming to this journey very late in life. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. The other reason why I wanted to do this set of videos is because I know that for many people who are doing this journey, their religious faith sometimes becomes an impediment or something that they have to disavow, move away from, or whatever, because it's not supportive of this journey. And I want to be able to give some thoughts and talk about some ways where our religious faith can be seen as a source of support for this journey as opposed to something that is opposed to it. I want to start this series of videos with the process for discernment that I went through to get to this point. Now, one of the things I talked about my age, I did not even ask a question about whether I was transgender until I was well into my 65th year. So I was in my mid-60s before I even started considering whether this was something I even needed to do or not. And so there's a bunch of obstacles that I needed to overcome in terms of getting to the point where I could even ask the question. And the first one was my age. I had gone through, there were a bunch of signs when I was younger and throughout my life that I attributed other causes towards, which are two. And so when I got later in life and I started asking some questions about what I really wanted to be, there were some fantasies about what it would be like to be a girl, there were some desires to cross-dress, to dress as a woman. And in terms of going and doing research on that, one of the things I did, I went online like everybody does, and there were a bunch of YouTube videos of people who were transitioning, who were doing this, and almost all of them would talk about knowing at a very young age that they were different, that they did not feel comfortable with their assigned gender at birth, and I didn't feel that. I didn't have that sense, and so one of the things I had to deal with was, well, I can't be transgender because I didn't have any sense of that much before my mid-60s. And so that was one of the first things that I ended up dealing with. The second was what I was taught growing up was if you wanted to know what your gender was, you looked between your legs and it would tell you whether you were male or female. There wasn't a difference between physiological characteristics and gender, and that was settled, and there was no point in questioning it. And you just and it was a very stoic culture that I grew up in. Feelings weren't considered to be terribly important. Tasks were important. You had things that you needed to do. You needed to persevere in the face of any obstacles. How you felt about it was irrelevant. And so it was not a culture that was inducive to me asking questions. And so that was it was a mindset that I took and I lived with. Asked questions about a lot of other things, but not this particular area. And so I really had to deal with the fact that I didn't really think transgender was a thing. And then there's still this transphobia, and it's internalized. Um, there would be things like, well, people who do things like that are crazy, or people who do things like that, people who are trans are, there's an ulterior motive for what they're doing. They're trying to game the system, or they're trying to get an advantage, or they're trying to do something um, for themselves that has nothing to do with identity, has nothing to do, it's just a way of getting ahead or getting a show on television or whatever. And so those were the types of things that were in my mind. So I had to really sort of deal with all the internalized transphobia that I had in order to even get to the point where I would allow myself to ask the question. Now, I've already talked about not accepting transgender as a thing, as part of all of this. But there are other things that were sort of individual types of responses as well. One of them was, well, things like that don't happen to me. Now, I've had illnesses where that don't happen to a lot of other people either. I don't know why I would say that, but it was one of the things I would throw at me. It would also be things like, well, it's not something that normally would happen or likely to happen, so chances are, nah, this is something else. There's the fear of the answer. If I'm transgender, then there's a bunch of other things that I start having to deal with, and I don't necessarily want to deal with that. My life at that point in time, I was retired, I was in a good relationship, I had a family. Why ruffle the waters? And part of that also, part of the outcome of asking the question is, well, all of a sudden, the relationships that I rely on that are important to me start becoming at risk. Do I lose my marriage of 25 years? Do I lose my child if I start asking this question, if I answer it? And so these are the types of questions that go in that are really resistant to getting us to ask the question. And you have to find your own answers to those. I can't give you clear-cut answers. I can talk a little bit about what got me past those. And part of it is that there's just a sense that in terms of thinking about, well, if I'm, getting to the point of even asking it, it's like, well, there's something that's pushing here. And I had gone through therapy when I was much younger. I went through 7 years of very intensive psychotherapy to reduce anxiety. And one of the things that had always sort of puzzled me about that had never gotten fully resolved was the sense that there was something keeping me from being the person I should just automatically be, just to be authentic, to just be spontaneous. It was like a little catch or something I had to overcome that. And like I said, there was this resurrection of these feelings about wanting to cross-dress as a woman. And I talked to my wife about that, and she reluctantly said, okay. And the first time I did, I felt very complete. I felt very home with myself, and I felt very peaceful with myself. And so that experience, the wholeness that I felt, the completeness, the peacefulness, was something that started saying, there's something here that is worth pursuing, even in face of these other risks. So I finally got myself to ask the first question: am I transgender? And then I started evaluating the answers. Well, the answer no was the one I really wanted. And I can take care of that one pretty fast first, because the impact of being able to answer no was, well, I don't have to do anything. And the evidence for a no answer was really the stuff that I'd already been dealing with, the things that have been keeping me from getting to the question in the first place. Um, all those things. Well, it can't happen to me. I'm too old. I would have known before this. It's a risk to family. I don't really care. I just wouldn't do anything about it anyway. So why even ask the question? Those are all the things that sort of go into the evidence for no. But I had to sit down and say, okay, well, let's evaluate the answer. If I answer yes, what happens? Well, first of all, what happened was, in terms of looking back over my life, there were a lot of distinct incidents that had not exactly puzzled me, but I'd always found separate ways of sort of dealing with them and attributing them to different types of causes, but all of a sudden they made sense as a whole, as a unit. And it's almost like seeing that this thing that looked like a separate thread is really the same thread running through the fabric of your life. You start going, well, there's something to that. At least I did. As I looked at that, I started becoming more open to the possibility that yes might be the right answer. But I still, first of all, really wanted the answer to be no, because a yes answer really was a very frightening answer. So I called up a friend of mine who had gone through a discernment process that he had talked to me about fairly extensively, and who knew me well enough, knew my tendencies towards being somewhat self-delusional at times, making mountains out of molehills, if you will. And I called him up and I said, I need to talk to you about something. And so we got together over lunch, and finally, when I worked up the courage for it, managed to go through the whole, well, this is why I think what I think, and I got to the point where I started talking about the therapy that I'd mentioned before, and that there were these two issues. One was I've already talked about this feeling that there's something keeping me from being authentic, and the second one was a feeling of that women were trying to take over my life, and it was it was interesting because as I was talking to him about those, you could start seeing him nod, like, okay, this is making sense. And at the end of my little presentation of, well, he said, well, he doesn't know much about transgender, which is fair. He doesn't really understand it and wasn't really quite sure that it was really a thing. But at the same time, he said, you're not self-deluding yourself. It's a reasonable process that you've gone through, and there's something that needs to be considered. And then he said, he addressed some other ways that I've interacted with him in the past that were much more feminine. And he said, in some ways, I'm not surprised by this. And that raised the feeling that the answer was actually yes, even higher. And at that point in time, I pretty much decided that I needed to seek out some sort of professional help. But I still didn't really want to go and talk to my wife about going to see a gender therapist because of the risks. I mean, I sort of pushed as far as I thought I could push it with just wanting to dress like a woman from time to time. But there was something that was building that really couldn't be denied. And so I got online, I did more research. I found a book by a gender therapist, Dara Hoffman Fox. And in Dara's book, she goes through, it's called You and Your Gender Identity, and I'll try to leave a link to it down below where you can get it. And she goes through a whole program of discernment. And I really recommend this book if you can get hold of it, because she's done a really good job with it. And in doing that, I was sort of working through the first exercise, and so I got down to one on shame. And I thought, not much ashamed of anything. And going through and doing the exercise, I started to realize how much shame I had been living with all my life, that I had sort of broken into little fragments and sort of scattered them around the edges of my life so I didn't have to deal with the totality of it. But in terms of recognizing the role that shame was actually playing in controlling my life, I finally worked up the courage to talk to my wife and say, I need to go find a gender therapist. So she and I worked together on finding a therapist. Um, I wanted to make sure we found a therapist that she felt comfortable with. I wanted us to go through the therapy, through the exploration process together. I met with the therapist the first time by myself, and I sat down with the therapist and I did pretty much the same thing I'd done with my friend. And I went through and wanted her basically at the end of the thing to say, you're not transgender, I can see why you're worried, but you're not. This is what transgender means, and you're just not there. I was also worried that she would tell me that I wasn't transgender because I'm not, this isn't what transgender is. So in some ways I was worried about whatever the answer was. It was interesting to me, and I didn't really notice it at the time, but it was interesting to me that in my response to that meeting and being with her and talking with her, I was really worried about both answers, whether it was yes or no. I was really concerned about it because yes felt right and no was much more comfortable. And so there was this inward tension between what was comfortable, what was easy, and what felt really right, what felt like I really needed to do. But at the end of the session, she said, you know what the answer is. You tell me. And I had to go with what I thought was the right answer. And that was, yes, I am transgender. So once I ask the question, once I get to the point where I answer it, the first two steps, then what? I have to actually affirm the answer. And this is an important step, and it wasn't until I started doing this, thinking about this video, that I realized that was an important step in there, because before I could even start doing anything with it, I had to take the answer and say, yes, this is my answer. Yes, I am owning it. And so, again, this means I had to go deal with the doubts. Well, I didn't know until I was, 65 years old. So how could I be transgender? How could I have an answer of yes? I had to deal with that doubt. The culture I grew up in really discouraged, was against or impeded any questioning, and I lived within that culture or that cultural framework, even though I didn't live in that culture anymore, for all my life. And so it took a long time to overcome that. And the same thing with the other things that had been doubts or prohibitions from asking or thinking about the answer. And dealing with those doubts, they didn't go away completely. I still deal with them now. It's not like you have this magic, oh, well, everything goes and everything's fine. But they're much less strong now than they were, and they keep getting weaker every time that I go through another experience. And as I've gone through this journey so far, I've found even more places and more evidence where it's obvious that I'm on the right journey, including people who have told me that, well, you seem somewhat like a woman to me. They just never asked, and it never was. And so there's just a sense of, and people coming and saying, we see a very positive change in you since you've come out as a woman. So those are the types of things that start going, okay, I really am in the right place. This is really the right thing I should be doing. Even though there's still the little doubts and things that find ways to dig at you. So once I've gotten to the affirmation, and affirmation is different than acceptance. I want to point that out as well. Once I got to affirmation, then I could move on. I could move on into starting acceptance. You have to say yes, the answers are yes, before you can start saying, oh my goodness, how am I going to accept myself this way? And that's really the process I'm in right at the moment, is how do I accept myself this way? What are the things, and so I'm in the process now of starting my transition. But I want to talk about why I decided to transition and why you might not want to. That seems to be sort of a big issue. And I'm going to not do a whole lot with it. I wanted to transition. I didn't have a job. I was retired, so I didn't have to worry about coming out at work, although I have come out to the people I used to work with. So I didn't have to worry about the workplace environment and discrimination there or anything along those lines. I was already involving my wife, so she was already part of this process. She wasn't happy when I told her I was transgender. After the first meeting with the therapist, she's coming to grips with it, and we are going through this process together. We're transitioning, if you will, as a unit, as a couple. I've been able to come out to my daughter. I've been able to come out to my community of faith. But in all those cases, you don't know how people are going to react when you come out to them. And so, depending on your read of the people around you and how open you think they might be and how important this is to you, it may be more of a risk to come out to people than you feel like it's worth. And again, I can't answer that for other people, but it's a difficult question, and it's one that you struggle with. And as soon as you want to come out, it is one of the scariest things, if not the scariest thing, that you'll ever do. Maintaining relationships, to me, was very important. I didn't want to be one of those people that says, well, I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do, and if you don't like it, you can just go away. But at the same time, maintaining relationships becomes an impediment to moving forward, to really becoming accepting, because you start going, well, maybe I can negotiate on this, or maybe I can do something else, and it becomes important to realize that what is becoming an impediment is other people's reaction to you and how they react, and you can't be in charge of that anymore. I've lived my entire life trying to control how other people would respond to me, and I can't do that. And a transgender person generally is going through the same thing. They've tried to control how other people are going to respond to them, and they've got to stop doing that. And they've got to say, this is my life, I've got to live it for me, but at the same time try to find some way to maintain the relationship with the other person. And that is a very difficult thing to do. Again, other reasons for not transitioning like that, the relationships in your life, how important they are to you. You lose certain relationships and it causes deep depression. And so you have to be aware of those things. If you're working at a job, you have to really be conscious of what the job situation is, whether or not you could transition. Your local environment, I'm not sure that if I were still living in Texas, for example, I'd be so anxious to come out, because the local environment could be very, very different, very, very negative, very, very hostile. There are safety issues, so there are all sorts of issues why you may not want to transition. But for me, transitioning was the right answer. I had to come to grips with who am I really. And I know a lot of that. There's a bunch of things that don't change with this, but there are also things that do. And I will explore those in later videos. For now, I would like to thank you for watching this one to the end. Please feel free to leave comments, suggestions for future topics. Any feedback that you might have, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And I want to thank you very much for watching.